This next section, 1.7, is going to be on the midpoint and distance formula in the coordinate plane. So first of all, what's a coordinate plane? It looks like this. It's your x and your y axis and all your points laid out on a grid. So that's what I mean when I say the coordinate plane. The midpoint formula says that the midpoint of any 2 points that we call x1, y1. So for example, if this was 2, 5, then it would be located 2 to the right and 5 up. And if we had another one, say -1 and then 7, that would be located 1 to the left and 7 up. So we have to remember how to graph our points. The first coordinate is left, right, which is the x coordinates, and like this is the x axis, and our second coordinates are up and down on the y axis on the coordinate plane. All you do to find the midpoint is you average the x's. Well, remember, to find an average, you add and divide by how many? The second coordinate would be found by adding the y's and dividing by 2. So we're basically averaging the x coordinates and averaging the y coordinates. For example, back up here on my fake points, I would say 2 plus -1, and then I divide by 2. And then for the y's, I do 5 plus 7 and divide by 2. And that would land me at the midpoint. Okay, so I just do that arithmetic, but we're going to practice that down here. So this is, what are the coordinates of point A? Point A is 7 to the left, to the right, so that'd be a +7, and 3 up. To the right and up are positives. Point B is 5 to the left, so it'd be located at -5, and it's at 5 up, so +5. It says use the midpoint formula to find the coordinates of M, the midpoint. So let's go do that. M is equal to, we grab our x coordinates, the first ones, we add them up, and we divide by 2. We grab our y coordinates, the second ones, we add them up. You know, we can see that 4 is right in the middle of there, right? So sometimes we can use a little common sense, but all right. So now when I do 7 minus 5, I get a 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So when I go plot M at 1, 4, I go 1 to the right and 4 up. Doesn't it look like it's in the middle, right? This is my point M, and it looks like it's right smack in the middle. So lo and behold, it works, right? This is to find the midpoint of GH. Well, we're just going to use our formula. We grab our x coordinates, we add them up. We average them, or divide by 2. We grab our y coordinates, we add them up, average them, or divide by 2. It's a point, so I put it in parentheses, and I like to call it M for the midpoint. Okay, now we'll do our arithmetic. -1 plus -5 is -6. -6 divided by 2 is a -3. And it looks like -3 would be in the middle of those, correct? 7 plus a -2 right here on top is 5. 5 divided by 2 is 5/2, or we can write it as 2.5, and that would be our midpoint. So really you just add and divide by 2. Add the x's, divide by 2, add the y's, divide by 2. The midpoint formula is really easy. But sometimes we'll be given the midpoint, and it's going to ask us for the other endpoint. So on this one, I don't need to find the midpoint. It was given to me. I'm missing an endpoint. There's 2 ways to do this with algebra and actually using the formula. Okay, what does that say? It says to get the midpoint, I take my endpoints, and one is missing, so I'm going to call it 7 plus, I don't know, I'm missing that x. When I divide by 2, I need to get a 1, okay, because that's the average of the x's is a 1. So how do I solve that? To undo division, I multiply by 2. Then I subtract 7 from both sides, giving me a negative 5. So this first endpoint would be a negative 5. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the y's. 3 plus my unknown y, when averaged, has to equal a 4. Double both sides to get rid of that fraction. Subtract 3, and there would be my midpoint, would be at negative 5, 5. I don't really like that method. I think it's just following steps and not really getting the common sense of it. So I'm going to teach you a little bit easier method. Okay? What I want you to do is put the first one down first. This is A. Right below it, I want you to put the midpoint. And then right below that, we're going to walk ourselves to the other endpoint. Because if you're in the middle, for example, if I take 1, 2, 3 steps to get to the middle, then to get to the other side, I would go and continue 3 more steps, right? So if I go from 7 to 1, I went back 6 steps. So I'm going to go back 6 more steps to get to negative 5. Look at how slick that is, guys. Here was our answer with the algebra. We got a negative 5. Just with a little common sense, we arrived at the same spot. So to get from 3 to 4, I went up 1. So to get to the middle, I went forward 1, which means to get to the other end, I go whoopsie daisies. I go forward another 1. 4 plus 1 is 5. Notice I've got the same answers. So you're going to decide which method you like better. You're going to pause the video and you're going to try it with this next one. Now that you're back, I really gravitate towards the second option because I just think it makes more sense. I'm at negative 1, 3. I'll get myself to the middle. And however I walked to get there from A to the middle, I'll continue walking in that same direction to get to the other endpoint. So from negative 1 to 12 on a number line or with temperature is 12 steps forward. So I will continue that walk to get to the other endpoint. To get from 3 above to 8 below, I drop 11. So I will drop 11 more to get to the other endpoint. That's how I would do it. Now, if you did it the other way, you would say, well, I don't know this x, but I know negative 1 plus it when I average has to give me the x coordinate of my midpoint. You would double both sides, then add 1, and you're still going to get that 23. So you're going to decide if you like to walk or use the algebra. So that's our midpoint formula, right? And you'll be practicing that, obviously, in your homework. The distance formula is not get the middle, but tell me how long that is. Okay, what's its length? What's the distance between the 2 points? And that's a pretty big formula. It's found by taking the square root. So it always starts with a root of what you get when you grab those first coordinates. We call them the x coordinates, and you subtract them. It doesn't really matter the order that you subtract them, but most, if you Google, it'll say x2 minus x1. But you're going to be squaring anyway, so that doesn't really matter. Oops, x. I'm going to make that a little bit better. Here, let me erase. Make sure I've got it down here correctly for you. So you subtract the x's, and then you square. Add to it what you get when you subtract the y's, and then you square it. All right, so we're going to be finding the distance between 2 points. All right, so let's go over here. We've got, without a graph, 2 points. Remember, we call them x1, x2 for the first coordinates, y1, y2 for the second coordinates. The distance between them, which we call qk with nothing over the top of it, is found by taking the square root up. The formula says, formulas are like maps, that we do x2 minus x1, and we square. Then we add to it what we get when we do y2, use those parentheses, minus y1. We know that 2 negatives make a positive, so that's really 5 plus 1 in there, which is really 6 that we need to square. So we'll have 6 squared plus, and then same over here, these 2 negatives will make a plus, so I'll have negative 1 plus 3, which is 2, so that's a 2 that I need to square. 6 squared is 36, 2 squared is 4, 36 plus 4 is 40. And we're going to work with simplifying that later, so you're going to be allowed to round that. So you would go to your calculator and do the square root of 40. I don't have one of those on me right now, so unfortunately I can't do that. All right? So again, formulas are like a map. You just have to be very careful. Like watch your negatives. It's 5 minus a negative 1, which is 5 plus 1, which is 6 that needs to get squared. So you just got to be really careful. So this one with a graph, sometimes, if it's, I don't know why it keeps doing that. Sometimes when it's graphed, you might just want to walk to find how far apart the x's are, because when we subtract, that's what we do. So technically, we're supposed to go 2 minus negative 3 is 5, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 5, right? So the distance formula would be 2 first x, second x, minus a negative 3, and I need to square it, plus. Now we grab those y coordinates, which will tell you how far this is, which would be negative 3 minus 4, and we need to square it. But, let's go do it. 2 plus 3 gives me 5. 5 squared is 25. Negative 3 minus 4 is a negative 7 that I need to square. Now these parentheses are important. You shouldn't get any negatives under there. So just know that if you thought that was negative 49, something's wrong. No negatives under that root once we're all done. So I end up with a 25 right here plus a 49, which gives me the square root of 74, and I would go around that accordingly on my calculator. How about, that would be how long this is from here to here. How about the distance, the midpoint of AB? Well, let's go do what the midpoint formula says. It says we do x1, negative 3, plus 2. So the midpoint would be, let me erase some of this. I didn't have quite enough space on there for you guys, huh? So I would do negative 3 first x plus the second x, and then I'd average. It's a point, so I'm putting it in parentheses like that. And then I'd grab my y's, which would be a 4 plus a negative 3, my 2 second coordinates, and I'd average. When I do that, this gives me a negative 1, so I'd have a negative 1/2. This gives me a positive 1, so I have a positive 1/2. Let's go see if negative 1/2, positive 1/2 looks like it's in the middle. Let's go 1/2 to the left and a 1/2 up. Does that look good for the midpoint? I think it does. I think it looks great. Okay, so to recap, this would be really no card worthy, but you better have this out if you're going to ask me for help on Delta Math, right? To find the midpoint, we grab those x's, those first coordinates, we add them, divide by 2. And it's a point. So then we grab those y coordinates, we add them, and we divide by 2, and then make sure you put your answers in parentheses. It is a point. Negative 1/2, comma 1/2. The distance is a number. It's how long it is. And to find it, we do the square root of what we get when we do subtracting of the x's and squaring it, plus subtraction of the y's and squaring it. All right, so those are our two formulas for today. Midpoint formula, distance formula. Have them right big front and center. All right, have a good one.